introduce or should I introduce?
Yeah, we can just cross-post this podcast. So this is going to be the Dossier and the Late Republic podcast. Both are going to be available on Substack. Me and my good friend Dave Riboy, we're going to talk about all kinds of things related to the foundations of our country, where it currently stands, reasons for pessimism, reasons for optimism. We're going to try to stay on the optimistic side because I think that I don't know if you share this, that I think when you talk to a lot of people and you bring up the idea that we're in like a late republic situation, they automatically think like, oh, so we're screwed. Like, so people are just going to go to the gulags and, we have this inevitable path to tyranny. But I think what a lot of people miss is that there's going to be these alternative factions that kind of pop up, and there's going to be a lot of reasons to flourish in the future, that it's not just this governmental tyranny is going to destroy us all. There's a lot of reasons to believe that we're going to have more autonomy, more personal sovereignty than ever before.
Yeah, I would agree with that for a number of reasons. I don't know. For my part, in 2012, when Romney lost to Obama, I looked around and I thought, okay, something is very deeply, deeply wrong with this country. I understand how Obama won in 2008. I do not understand how he was reelected 4 years later. It seemed to me that the country had significantly changed in a number of ways. And sort of since then, especially heightening for some reason in 2015, the country seemed to go through, spasms of change, let's say. And I think we can trace it. I mean, I always trace it in my mind to sort of an unlikely event. It was actually the Caitlyn Jenner trans controversy. I think it was 2015, where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you had to be, not only approving of, but celebratory of the trans movement. Dead naming became a terrible offense. And all of a sudden everything changed, and you could really not dissent from the party line. And I think what happened was the media looked around, and the activist groups, but primarily the media, they looked around and they thought to themselves, we got this, we pretty much did this ourselves. And we were able to make a complete civilizational change that had been, existent, for as long as people have thought about these things. And we were able to just basically force this through with the power that we have over communications and culture. And after that, I think they said, you know what, we're going to do this on a lot of other fronts as well. And that kicked off a 2.0 version of the culture war that really, for a lot of people, made them feel like it's no longer America, because frankly, it isn't. It's not the America you grew up in. It's not the America I grew up in, and I'm not that old. And we are, so I guess that's point one, which is we are in something very different. And many of us believe it is something very bad. So that's part one. Part two is, what you got into, which is kind of reasons for optimism. And in this conversation, I think we should definitely go there and be more specific about these things. But I just wanted to sort of go back and give a little idea. I think a lot of our viewers and listeners will find that maybe it was around then things start to change and they start to feel like things are different. And one of those big things is the state of the country, and it's not even necessarily political. It's not necessarily political. I think it's primarily cultural. and not even the things that we think of as cultural. It's not the movies, it's not it's cultural in terms of acceptable discourse in American society, and the consequences of violating that, the consequences of being outside of it, the very narrow strand of what is acceptable in terms of what is not racist, homophobic, Islamophobic, blah blah blah, etc. And the consequences for people who violate them, because as time goes on, what folks are reacting to instinctively is the fact that they basically have to stand in place. They didn't think 5 years ago that they were horrible fascists and Nazis, and all they have to do is stand in place, and within a very short time they will be called fascists and Nazis and a whole bunch of other things. So it's the most natural thing in the world for people to feel like they are in a place that is, for them to feel like they're no longer welcome in their own home. And I think that creates a whole host of problems politically, socially, and otherwise.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is, there's two different cultures that are propping up now. People have gotten to the point, especially I think COVID acts as an accelerant of this, that people have gotten to the point where they totally tuned out the culture being led by the elites. And a lot of people are just kind of like quietly doing their own thing. This is especially the case with the corporate press. I think that some people even I speaking for myself, like my opinion on the corporate press has changed dramatically over the last even like 5 or so years, that I thought that there were some things that were redeemable about such an institution. And now it's very clear to me that they need to be destroyed, and I look forward to their demise. And the corporate press includes not just CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, but also includes, the News Corp people too. Especially like with this like Corona fascism stuff, these corporate interests are just, not really looking out for us. But, like you just did a huge thing you just were on Tim Pool's show, right? And the dude gets like 1 million hits plus per episode. And there's a lot of things that, make me optimistic that there are alternative venues. And yes, there are social media giants, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube are cracking down to some extent, but there's still room, I think, right now. And it's going to be interesting to see how these, the oligarchs make their next move, but they are still somewhat helping to facilitate, like our countercultural movement in the United States. I think they realize that, and if they totally embrace this like censorship regime, they might find themselves struggling to stay afloat. But I don't know if it's inevitable. But I was wondering, like, what do you think is the next move? Because like we've made a lot of the right, the base people, that whole contingent. We've made a lot of progress in converting people to our side, and we have the numbers. We have our people have the guns, so it's like it's not like they can just like throw us into the gulags tomorrow, as much as some like radicals would like to do so. We still have a lot of power centers, even though they might be like more decentralized and outside of these urban areas. What do you think is the inevitable next move that the elites, that the left is going to make? Because it seems like we're at this point where they, I think, realize that when someone like Dan Bongino is taking up all the Facebook traffic and stuff like that, they don't like that. And I think it's inevitable that like there's some big move that's going to be made, but I think that we'll find some counter move to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. They hate it. I mean, CNN basically is a deplatforming outfit and nothing else. at this point. Pick the target, freeze it, polarize it, and make sure to get them either demonetized or banned outright.
But it doesn't
And
seem like it's
yeah,
working. Like you got a guy like Brian Stelter that goes on TV
right,
and like people on like Twitter just like clowning on him, like calling him a potato. It's just
right, yeah,
like
yeah.
no one
I
has
mean,
any respect for him anymore.
I think these guys realized, or maybe they're starting to realize, maybe they're not, but we've realized, and a lot of the American people have as well, that there's a finite amount of times they can do this. There's a finite amount of times that they can try to. I mean, they can deplatform all day long, but um, it's just getting harder and harder to take some of these attacks seriously that come from the media. I mean, I think folks who were destroyed 5 years ago over nothing. Maybe this year, the next year, um, they wouldn't get into situations like that again. I think, especially now, smaller employers, smaller businesses, things like that are 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 a little cognizant of the fact that we shouldn't just throw somebody under the bus um, out of nowhere because there's a little social media pressure, et cetera. We're not going to ruin somebody's life. At least I hope so. At least people are, I think, I mean, it appears as though they're getting that message. Hopefully, obviously with the big corporations are just going to throw anyone overboard that they can. And that's a problem. Just like,
Yeah, our buddy Chris Rufo just released a report on how Raytheon is now doing critical race theory training for its white employees. And this comes after Boeing decided to do the same thing. And it's so fascinating. We both kind of have a background spending some time at DC. Like even I didn't realize like how insanely woke and crazy these institutions were. And I think that like it's our job as commentators and journalists and stuff to really keep hammering home how insane the state of affairs is in DC, because I think a lot of people don't even realize how corrupt, deceitful, and like just straight up evil these people are. And by doing so, we can continue to like grow support for our movement that I think is more based in what the foundational principles of America used to be. Like these people, these military contractors or these government bureaucrats, they're so far detached from what America should be that
yeah,
they're just
they're
like a
they're
joke.
detached, and they were also never really bright. I mean,
Mm.
maybe they were bright before we were born, or sometime many decades ago. But I mean, since I was there, since you were there, you know, this is not, we're not talking about, we're not talking about the Manhattan Project guys.
No.
Here, I mean, we're talking about glorified project managers at best. And and frankly, folks who get paid either way, because the defense budget is always growing, and there are more justifications for it, and they're getting money either way. And like, there's one of my favorite things to point out to people who are always screaming about the, like, let's say things like the foreign aid budget, because folks need to realize that in Washington, it's not exactly as it seems. Foreign aid, for example, doesn't get shipped to a foreign country. It gets spent in Washington primarily at think tanks, progressive nonprofits, military industrial complex groups, and things like that. If we're giving $10 million to trans education in Pakistan, that's not the Pakistani government or the Pakistani citizens getting that money. That money is going directly to like some whacked out leftist nonprofit that is going to spend the money in Pakistan doing
Yeah,
that.
this is like peak clown
Yeah,
republic, right?
yeah,
That's why it's like all of our institutions. It's not like that. Like I felt like when I realized this, I was like, am I just going insane? And then you kind of look at these people and you're like, none of them are really impressive intellectually. All of these think tanks and other NGOs, they're just so laughably corrupt. and anyone who takes part in that system has to just embrace the corruption. And I think we have friends in these systems that just kind of like sit on the sidelines and realize how insane it is that they're like part of the system. But there's like no redeeming these institutions. They're going to have to fall, hopefully
Well,
sooner rather than later.
increasingly, I think what's happening is that increasingly a lot of these places are not at all are doing things that are just not at all relevant to, to the American people at all. I mean,
Mhm.
I know where I spent a lot of time, Center for Security Policy for many years. I mean, I think it's, one of the rare good ones in the sense that they're still doing good work and they've always kept an eye out for things that um, for things that primarily affected the American citizen,
Yep.
and have been on the kind of forefront of a lot of amazing, really really important battles over the last, 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
But a lot of other places, it's still it's still kind of ridiculous. And it's like the famous self-licking ice cream cone, which is a thing which is like an analogy and a joke that I never really understood until, until, being in DC. Like a self-licking ice cream cone. I don't understand how that works. And like, that's the point, you know,
It-
is that it is an absurdity, and it perpetuates itself in order to perpetuate itself.
yeah, and I think that at least people on the so-called right that participate in this system, they like it because you got these wealthy donors paying them probably twice as much as they would earn on the open market. So it's like a nice, cushy situation. I think that they just like compartmentalize what's going on around them. Just like, yeah, I'm just going to write my paper about Venezuelan sanctions and stuff like this, and we're just going to pretend that everything is very normal, and that the military hasn't gone completely woke, and our president doesn't have dementia, and like we're in a normal time, right?
Right. So this is a point that you brought up before, and I brought it up before, which is that I mean, we came up and we spent most of our careers in the national security foreign policy space. And then it's like, what a huge thing and we've both kind of gone through this experience, like what a huge thing it is to wake up and realize like, oh shit, this is just not anything anywhere near as important as, as it once was, or that we thought it was. And it was a really kind of defining moment, because you can kind of go in either direction.
Yeah.
You can say, no, I'm not going to I'm not going to kind of assimilate this new information. I'm going to do what I've been doing, which is like, hey, everybody's got to make a living, and frankly, um, you know, good people need to be in there in the trenches fighting, because if no good people are in there in the trenches fighting, then the bad guys have a far easier time to march through and to make and to make messes a lot worse than they could have been. But on the other hand, like the path that you took, the path that I took was like, no, I have to admit, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
I can't do this anymore because it's just not as important as the other stuff, and sort of as that process goes along, and now I'm actually interestingly involved in a new project that's kind of forthcoming next year, which will be a collection of the foreign policy works of John Quincy Adams,
Nice.
which is going to be really great, because he is, I mean, he's someone who really set the tone for much of American foreign policy before the 20th century. And and a lot of his stuff on the subject has not been, kind of anthologized and contextualized. But so I'm looking forward to that project. But as the as the classical philosophers would say, and I think increasingly they were right, and that reality has kind of reasserted itself, which is that, at the end of the day, we are sovereign nations. And the primary goal of a sovereign nation is to secure the well-being of its citizens. It's not to fight demons abroad. It's not to, take part in a massive, ideological expedition around the globe in order to do, X, Y, or Z for good or ill.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting though. Like I was just talking about this the other day. Like the looking back, because now like I think the U.S. is finally drawing down from Afghanistan, and there's going to be basically like a few dozen people guarding an airport. Um, it's so insane to look back at those times. I was super young then, but even like the justification was on such thin merits. Even when we entered Afghanistan, like, yes, I lived right across New York City, and 9/11 was a horrible terrorist attack. But when you look back on like what we actually did in Afghanistan for 20 years, like what did that actually have to do with 9/11? Probably one less than 1% of it was like a retaliation from 9/11. And of course we found Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. And it's like it just
because of course we did.
it just blows my mind that this was like the acceptable discourse for decades, for 2 decades, and no one really substantially challenged it in any elected office throughout Congress whatsoever. The insanity of the Bush administration to try these democracy projects. Like we moved the window. Well, the country and the so-called elites and the thinkers moved this window of like ideology to such a crazy place that and the corporate press, again, which is one of the reasons why you should hate them, is that they just kind of like accepted this propaganda like it was totally normal to just like send tens of thousands of soldiers into a country of subsistence farmers, people living in the mountains, like people like freaking like herding sheep all day. Yes, jihadis, but like it was just so insane what what the last 2 decades were like. And Iraq is just as bad. But like this elite class is so pathetically dim-witted. You come to that realization like how much they screwed up, and they are still these people. What's encouraging is that there's very little trust in this class at this point, and that's why I am more white-pilled nowadays, because in the first decade of the 21st century, people were just, I would say, if you did a poll about Afghanistan, Iraq, the popularity of these general class is just a total joke. There'd be like 90% support in the United States for it. I'd be interested to see polling now compared to polling then, and how people reflect on that. I think that our country has been educated in a productive manner about these foreign interventions, and it's unfortunate because like I think you and I, like we had a lot of it, we had to like question what some of our colleagues were saying, and kind of like have to reflect on how we for a time were caught up in this kind of like insanity of imperial going into all these countries, having a US presence in like 30 countries in Africa, on this like insane mission to like find the terrorists and kill the terrorists because 9/11 happened and they're going to come here if we don't kill all of them. It's just like it's so insane to look back on that and just realize like how like whacked out we were. I mean, at least I have an excuse for myself, and you do too. You were in your like 20s and whatever, and I think I was like a teenager. But just like the lack of serious people and intellectual depth of our decision makers during that time, and today it's the same problem. It's just like a bunch of people that just have no understanding of like what it takes to govern a functioning republic.
Right. So as you brought that up, I wanted to bring up something because at the end of the day, and this is why I got into this business, and why I persist in this, and when we say business, like it's whatever the fuck it is, I don't even know. But the kind of let's say the battle of ideas, or at least the recognition that ideas and what people think and how they construct the world really matters, and it's utterly consequential. And I think there are a lot of folks who would rather, who feel more comfortable looking at, defense, not defense, but like looking at people spending money and, whatever rich bankers or whoever pulling the strings in order to get, pipelines or this and that. And of course, all that exists. But ideas have an amazing way of shaping the world and what happens. And here's a great example. So as you were speaking, I thought of the person who is kind of primarily responsible for um, the intellectual push, let's say, of the freedom agenda. And I would give most of the credit to Bernard Lewis, who was the eminent Princeton historian, scholar of Islam, who died several years ago, but probably one of the most influential people of the late, certainly of the last 20 years, and in how we deal with a lot of these things. And so he wrote a piece, this piece that is up at Real Clear Politics. Is 2006, but I know that he's been saying this. There's one thing that he said sort of immediately after 9/11 that got the ball rolling, and I know he was very influential within the Bush White House. And the name of the piece is called "Bring Them Freedom or They Destroy Us."
Oh man.
And I mean,
And this
reading
is
back
not a
on
guy
it,
that's short of the facts. This is a genius that very much understands the region, which is interesting.
yes, and it's really interesting because I mean, I know somebody who's kind of obsessed with this malignant influence of Lewis through this time. And Lewis was a very clear-headed scholar of Islam and the Middle East for many years, for most of his life. And then all of a sudden he pops up out with this. And it ended up being embraced by a lot of folks who should have known better, but frankly were like intellectually ill prepared
Mhm.
to be able to fight back. And the propaganda coming from this set of ideas, and just kind of briefly, as I mean, the title says it all: bring them freedom or they destroy us, which is that at the end of the day, the fight that we have in the Middle East, the jihadis that are attacking us because their own systems are broken. And when their systems, when there's a lack of political freedom and social freedom, but especially political freedom, this kind of expresses itself, like the teapot, will kind of burst at the side with stuff in order to sort of vent the pressure. And that expresses itself in jihadi attacks on us. I mean, that's the very simplified thing. And so of course, like, what's the remedy then? The remedy then is to go all around the world and toppling these countries and installing Western style, what he said, Western style freedom. And you know let's say that it is moral to do so, to undertake such a project. Even if it was moral to undertake such a project, it's got to be realistic in order for it to be a thing. It was so unrealistic, and it's amazing to me. I mean, as you said, we went through 20 years of people still believing this. And frankly, you go to National Review, you go to commentary, you go to some of these places, and these talking points are so stale, but you hear them, you still hear them. And when you hear them, you're like, I can't believe that I'm in the Twilight Zone.
Right.
because reality has had absolutely no effect over 20 years. It's one thing to be, you and I were young, young, easily propagandized. I'm sure we had our concerns, but I remember this. I remember it distinctly when Bill Kristol slammed a Democratic opponent of the Iraq War and said, "What, you think Iraqis aren't suited for freedom?
Mm.
You racist." And a lot of Republicans cheered, and they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you got him." Dems are the real racists, right?
But
Sort
again,
of.
that's a white pill reflection, right? Because like if we transform back to 2003, 2004, the leaders of the GOP are George W. Bush, Dick Cheney. Our intellectual leaders are David Frum, Bill Kristol, like just total clowns, charlatans, like scammers, low IQ.
Right.
They at least like now we have some serious people with some really great energy supporting our ideas. Um, the whole idea of a uniparty really showed itself back then. But today in DC, we still have the uniparty, but we have people on the outside that are consuming more power, which is healthy, that you can just like hopefully end up somehow in the future we're going to have to like insert politicians that are very based and stuff like that. And I think that there's like some efforts, like a couple of our friends are running for Congress, and I hope they win. But
Yeah.
right now, the change will not come from Washington D.C. And I just love to see the energy coming from the outside, getting these like more decentralized movements, or even like listen to your favorite podcast, whomever that is, and getting some real knowledge from these avenues instead of just listening to these idiots on Fox News and CNN. Just like with these, Fox is some good people, but these laughably false and unimpressive talking points that I'm seeing. There's just so much more depth, I think, on the right now than there used to be. At least the depth has been elevated.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. And you know what? It always existed, but technology and the sort of Acela corridor cartel made it impossible to get to it. I mean, I remember perchance, I mean, I always tell the story. I was living in New York and I went to Tower Records magazine section in 2002, 2003. And I saw a Claremont review of books, which I'd never seen before, and in there was an article on uh, on kind of post 9/11 with both Angela Codevilla and also Mark Halperin. And man, it's still, these things still hold up absolutely perfectly, and you can find them on the Claremont Review of Books website. But the Acela corridor conservatives, the national, specifically it was like News Corp, Weekly Standard, National Review, commentary. These guys made sure not to deal at all with any criticism coming from their right, at all. Zero. It was unacknowledged. It was hermetically sealed. And that no longer exists, which is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing, and it's something to be white pilled about.
That's a good point. Like if their strategy, they lost the plot when they started to engage us too much. Like a guy like if you want to name drop some names, like a guy like Jonah Goldberg, David French, they are obsessed with engaging their opponents to the right, right? Like they didn't used to do that. They used to just like kind of like be like, oh yeah, these guys are like kooks. Don't take any of their words seriously. But they didn't even name names. And now they're just like heavily engaged with punching right entirely. But it's also offering legitimacy to those arguments. And then they're just continuing to lose their subscriber base. And I think that, people just now see them as clowns.
Yeah,
So
people see them as clowns. So this the same thing that we've done, great stuff, let's say in the commentariat, on one hand, but on the other hand, what ended up happening, and to your point about Washington, is over the last 4 years. I mean, it was longer than that, but over the last 4 years, people have seen, at least, they've seen that the government is completely in the hands of the administrative state. What people call the deep state is actually the national security branch of the administrative state. It's absolutely synonymous. A lot of people, the folks who argue that that doesn't exist, they're full of shit. It absolutely exists. It is staffed by a ton of people who all frankly just think the same way. And you don't need an additional level of corruption. Sometimes you get it, but you don't need an additional level of corruption on top of that universal agreement. And look how hard it was, right? In 2016, you had one candidate, Donald Trump, alone against, let's say, the Iraq War consensus. What was that, like North Carolina, or I think it was South Carolina debate? He came out really charging hard against Jeb and against his brother, the former president, and he got a standing ovation.
Yeah.
In the hall and outside. He was saying things that a lot of Republican voters believed. 0.1% of folks within the DC bubble held those opinions. And yet here we are. It's now 5 years later, and most of the Republican Party still in Washington, is still clinging to this stuff. So, victory after victory, poll after poll, these Republicans seem to be impervious.
I think that's like the magnet of Washington, though. Like, our best people are now no longer living in Washington and have no interest in being in Washington. So I think it's just like a sign of the times almost that the reason why Congress sucks, there's just like this institutional, you got like the revolving door lobbying stuff. But I think that, like, our best people just don't want to touch it at this point. Like, what is the point of running for Congress? I guess you can like make some bold statements on social media, but you're not really going to get anything done. I could name drop a half a dozen Congress members that I really like, and I appreciate what they're doing, but they're not really changing anything there.
Because the government is no longer the same. It's not the government of the founding. I mean, it's getting back to late Republic nonsense. It's not the Republic of the founding at all. The government is run. I mean, this was one of the big critiques that drew me to Claremont in the first place, which is something that John Marini talks about a lot in his writings, which is sort of going really in depth into the administrative state, kind of from a political philosophy point of view, which is that it's not just a cabal run by a bunch of people who think the same. It's in fact a cabal run by a bunch of people who think the same, who are running your country. And that last point is really key, because that brings it into the realm of, that brings it really into the realm of political philosophy, which is that, like, this regime, the American regime has changed substantially to get us to that point. And, and it means things for, for how we, consider ourselves, how we are actually governed in a way. And so what that means for members of Congress is it just turns the job into, you just become a social media influencer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we've got AOC and Ilhan Omar and Cori Bush and whatever. And then frankly, you've got on the other side of the coin, you've got a bunch of Republicans too, who very quickly have realized that their primary skill set doesn't have to be in crafting legislation or in negotiating with the executive branch or blah, 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 blah. It just basically has to be, social media influencer. You can be an Instagram star and you can really do this. So, because there's not much else to the gig at this point.
It's weird. I think that, like, one of our really important jobs as people that, have a decent sized audience is to make people aware of, the deep state, the administrative state, and how that includes, and I think this was an eye-opening experience during the COVID stuff and during the Trump presidency, was that this includes the defense establishment, this includes the Pentagon, and we're going to have to change the way we think about these kind of like blank checks that Republicans historically have been giving to these institutions. And in my opinion, it's clear as day that when that Republican constituents need to at least put pressure on these corrupt and deceitful legislators, that it's no longer acceptable. And the next Republican candidate for president needs to make it very clear that these institutions need to be defunded. They need to be removed from the executive branch entirely. And that's what they should be campaigning on. It shouldn't be on, some type of reform. Like, I think the right is so ready for someone that's just like going to go in there and not. Trump kind of like laid the groundwork for that, but I would love to see another person build upon that to the point where we get the right to a position where it's like, no, we actually don't want to give the Pentagon $800 billion this year. We want to radically reduce the influence of the institutions in Washington, D.C. And then you can start opening up the conversation about like, okay, so what does it look like to remove all of these power centers from DC, and then you can have some of your favorite discussions about two states and stuff like that. But I think it's so important for people to realize moving forward that who your adversaries are and who your allies are. And the DC people, it doesn't matter if the people in the Pentagon are still like wearing their uniform, like Mark Miley. These guys hate you. There's no like white hat coalition in the Pentagon that is ready to advance right-wing interests. They hate you and they want to do whatever they want. They want to continue their boondoggles overseas. They want to make their friends rich. They want to make Raytheon, Boeing rich. These people all work against your interests. And I think we're doing a lot to help people understand this, how legitimate this threat is, and it'll pay dividends hopefully in the next election cycle. And I think we're really going to see. There's a guy, I think Joe Kent, who's running
Yep.
He's kind of like, he's doing a lot of interesting things and talking about issues that no one has talked about. Like, he's like, okay, I don't like the FBI. He's like, F the FBI. Is like, okay, that's really cool. Like, I hope we get more congressmen that are like super based like that are talking like this about our institutions, because the right historically,
and intelligently too. I mean, he's a good guy,
yeah,
and he's sharp.
oh, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think the right historically has gotten suckered into supporting things that are actually against our own interests. So once we get everyone like fully red pilled or based on these issues, that's when you start to like make huge changes for not only your community but for more widespread areas of the country. And that's kind of, I think should be I hope that some people with a lot of money also realize that these should be priorities for the right moving forward.
Right. No, I agree. I think the next step here is to see what happens. I mean, the drama now is between Washington and the states, and what kind of Republican conservative governor in a state like let's say Florida is going to pop up, and where is he going to draw the line? Because that's that is like that's a political conflict, but it's like kind of metaphysical conflict too, between two completely opposed sets of visions of the world. And that it's actually a perfect forum for where that battle can play out.
Yeah, like Joe Biden was just recently in Florida, and I think all of the top people were with him. I would love to get to the point where Ron DeSantis is saying, we don't want you here. We want nothing to do with you. Stay home in Washington.
Oh yeah, well that's the dream.
We're not
That's
there
totally the
yet,
dream.
but I think we can get there. But he's doing great. He talk about defying narratives that he did so much stuff on the COVID front. With the women's transgender stuff. He's just been killing it. I'm so appreciative, and the guy has an awesome staff too. Like he's actually. I know Trump said he hired the best people. That was like his infamous line. But DeSantis is really hiring the best people and holding them to high standards, and it's so appreciated. I think he understands the game, and he's just killing it. And that's the thing. Like I don't really want to lose him, right? So like maybe we can just
Right.
send someone else to Washington to run on the ticket, because like Florida's like in a solid place, and I don't want to screw that up. Especially like he just won by 30,000 votes or whatever against a meth addicted.
Well, come on, let's be fair. We don't know if he was a meth addict. He was a meth user.
Yeah, he's just a
Right,
casual
right.
meth guy. He likes going to
Casual meth,
parties.
gay hookers,
Yeah.
who knows where it goes from
You know what I
fun to
found
addiction.
you know what I found interesting
Not for
about
me to say.
Gillum when
Yeah.
I was doing like research on Qatar, the jihadi nation in the Gulf.
Hmm.
They Gillum was like randomly at one of those events, and you're like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Oh, hysterical.
that Doha forum is just like a great place to see like who's super corrupt and willing to be bought off by the jihadis.
Right.
So interesting.
Look, a lot of people don't know better when they get the call. They say, "Oh, all right, sounds good."
Middle East paradise with
Yeah.
strings attached. You got to
Right.
cut a promo.
Right. I don't know if they go for his kind of lifestyle over there, but you know,
It's
so
yeah.
I wanted to talk because to sort of like but before we wrap up, I wanted to get to this because so you started a Substack several months ago, and I started a Substack like a month ago, and so we're both kind of doing this, and it's been really interesting and an amazing experience. um Tell me about it. Tell me about, number
Yeah.
one is why did you do it, and why do you think that yeah, I mean, why do you think it's cool?
Yeah, I think that the modern economy really emphasizes the need for having personal autonomy. And I spent a lot of time, I was at Breitbart, CRTV, Blaze. I was at like all these traditional Reddit Center institutions, and I enjoyed my time there and stuff like that. But I once I like had a decently sized audience, and I really appreciate people that follow me on Twitter, and I'm so honored that people find what I say interesting. Like I don't like a lot of people. It's interesting. They I'm sure they reach out to you and they're like, oh, how do I like build my following? I was like, I don't know, like say something interesting. Like,
Right,
but
right.
like there's no like secret to that. But I think Substack is great because you just have or whatever newsletter platform you want to use, but you can do so much now, and everyone can have their own publication. And with the podcasting too, you can reach an unlimited amount of audience as long as whatever you're saying is resonating with people. And I thought, yeah, I might take a bit of a cash hit at first by kind of just like jumping off and doing my own thing, but it's really paid dividends in the end. And anyone who's on the fence about it, they should just maybe not quit your job at first, but give it a shot. It's so nice to have the flexibility to just basically be able to work from wherever you want. And I think it motivates me as more of like someone who's more entrepreneurial that wants like set my own hours. And if I want to work 12 hours one day, that's fine. If I want to work 3 hours another day, it's fine. And just like keeping yourself accountable. I think there's just a lot of lessons to be learned. There's no need for these bigger institutions to really be around anymore. I mean, I have like we have USB mics, we have nice cameras, and it's just like the need for like this structure with sure, you might get some good production value if you're working for Fox News and you have a makeup person and stuff like that. But I don't think that's the way that this economy is going with the news media and the press. And I think that like this is kind of the way forward for people who have interesting things to say. What's your take on
Right.
all that?
No, I mean, I would agree with all that. I would make a couple observations, based on what you said. Well, the first thing is, it's fascinating that the kind of the televisual form of, let's say we're talking about politics. The televisual form of politics is basically what, like a minute soundbite, 4 5 minute hit at the most. A couple, people are doing longer form discussions, like, Mark Levin on Sundays, blah blah blah. But on the internet, what you've got, what are the things that are very popular? The things that are very popular are like 3 hour Joe Rogan podcasts
Yeah.
on one hand, and on the other hand is Twitter, which is the ultimate microblogging thing.
Mhm.
And if you want to get even more ridiculous, is you've got TikTok and you've got Instagram, all which condense information. And really, Substack exists in that in between space. And as you do it, like as I'm doing it, I'm learning, you can't make it too long, you can't make it too short, you can't, you're sort of you're groping around, or at least I'm groping around for like the correct, the correct mix that meets the needs of the audience, and also the medium, because the medium, I mean, the media is not medium isn't necessarily always the message, but it often is.
Yeah.
And I think we're living in a weird time where on one hand we have these kind of, super long, super in-depth, arguably self-indulgent 3 hour conversations on one hand. On the other hand, you have the very little thing. So what does that tell you? I'm not sure what it tells you. I would love to pick people's brains about it and think it through in that way. But yeah, I mean, Substack offers a, um, somewhere in the middle, and frankly, it's somewhere in the middle between the tweet and an article. We used to go and we used to do articles, you and I, for a lot of these, as you said, a lot of these conservative publications. And it's like, okay, 1,000 words and blah blah blah. And what's interesting is speaking of the autonomy, is I always hated to do. I can't do a 900 word or a 900 word or 1,000 word piece. I can't. Either it's like 400 words or it's
Mhm.
going to be 3,000 words. And 99% of the time it's 3,000 words or 5,000 or something like that. And increasingly there are fewer and fewer outlets that exist in the conservative space that will publish a thing that's 3,000 words.
And if they do, they're going to publish 50 things that day, right? So you're not going to get any hits on your piece, even if someone that
Right.
promotes it. So why waste the time putting all that time and energy into something like that? And I think there's something that keeps you more accountable about publishing under your own name consistently and your own site, rather than just like throwing something to one of the publications that we enjoy. I think, and at least like I personally hold myself to a pretty high standard when I'm publishing something, and it yeah, like you can publish something at another publication and maybe they'll like throw you some cash for that. But for me, it's just like I don't know. I like doing my own thing, so I don't really miss. And yeah, maybe I will from time to time, like throw something up at like Federalist, and you do the same too. And I think that's fun, every once in a while to put your name out there. But in this day and age, I don't think people really care about like the credentials of the publication. They're just like, I want to see what this person has to say or write, because
Right.
like
And this is a thing, but there's a thing that kind of goes across, or maybe it's the thing that social media taught us, which is that you end up developing a relationship with the person,
yeah,
like, let's say, I mean, I kind of hate this term, but with the content producer.
right,
whatever medium it happens to be, and you say, you know what, I want to go, I want to support this person because I like this person, and this person is interesting. And maybe they put out an article that I don't really give a shit about. Okay, that's fine. Or another time it's good, or maybe I like this person in on Twitter, and then maybe I'll take a chance on their Substack or whatever it is, which is usually how it comes for for you and I. So it's going to be I mean, I don't know, I think it's going to be wild. I'm looking forward to doing more.
Yeah, I've become, in this day and age, I've become anti-credentials. I purposely don't put my credentials on on my Twitter page now. I'm just like, all right, see if you like my stuff. And people that have followed me for a long time like know where I come from and stuff like that. But I think it's like, it's nice to be part of a movement that is purely based on if you can like have your shit together and produce something interesting, rather than like, oh, I went to Cornell and I'm going to write about politics. Like, no one gives a shit about that, right? So
no, but nobody gives a shit about it. I mean, look, I mean, I guess some people do, to the extent that they're hired
yeah,
by maybe useless outfits in Washington D.C. But yeah, and I mean, the other thing is that where credentials are no longer valid or accepted. Also, you have the entry of a bunch of new people who just kind of walk in off the street, which
right.
frankly, I don't know. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's great, and that's why a lot of the sort of credentialed people go crazy, and they have gone crazy since 2016. Trump, the ultimate non-credentialed person. But with
I don't know
Trump,
about you, but when I think about like, I have institutional distrust for anyone with a PhD at this point. Like when I see that someone online has a PhD, unless there's someone that I'm like well aware of, and they studied like a specific, maybe like philosophy
right?
that I respect, like someone with like a PhD from a top tier institution in the United States, I automatically think like Marxist, right?
Right,
So,
right. Or this
so
person is completely out of their minds. Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah. I mean, that's a
like
safe bet. It's a safe bet today. And what's cool is that at the end of the day, all you really need to do is do good stuff,
mhm.
and stuff that's interesting. And you
But
know,
I think that's like the social media environment, at least while we're allowed to expand our audiences before I think an inevitable crackdown comes on that too. This is kind of like, I think that's the reason why the right is winning, because our ideas are better. Our ideas are substantially better. Our people tend to be more intellectually curious, and they are operating under a paradigm that we kind of control. And when push comes to shove, we just have smarter, more interesting people right now. And I think that the left almost realizes that. And that's why I think that in the future we'll see some kind of play to even further crack down. But as of right now, that's why like I'm so optimistic, is because I think we have a better army on our side.
sure. For sure. And the way this is shaken out, I mean, our friend Kyle Scheidler always says that, I mean, for the last several years, he's been saying that, at the end of the day, the way this shook out in terms of, Trump, never Trump, and folks who are, based and not based, and, et cetera, et cetera. Like the way things shook out with the right people and our friends and all that stuff, it like, it shook out well. Like,
Yeah.
the community that was created, especially in the last couple of years, with some of us who were saying things that, let's say, challenge the old conservative orthodoxy. um I mean, what a great gang to be a part of.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us made our way through tremendous adversity too to get to a position of like influencing a lot of people. Like look at what our friend Julie Kelly's doing, right? She's like the one woman crew that's talking about perhaps the biggest story of the day, and she's getting tons of good feedback, and that stuff is makes me very optimistic. And there's so many people like that are, when you're willing to walk into this like war zone, sometimes if you have good things to say, a lot of people will hear you and realize, and then you're just going to continue to build that movement even more so. But yeah, I'm so appreciative of the friends and colleagues that I've made in this space, and I'll take our people against their people anytime, right?
Right. So this has been a white pill summer. Looking forward to black pill fall. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But I'm good. Have you got anything?
Nope. Enjoyed the conversation.
Fantastic. As always, I did as well. All right. Thank you very much for listening.